Hi, Brian Beneduce coming to you. Just had a great day on the water and figured it'd be a good time to continue reading a chapter from my book, Scared to Death, Do It Anyway. Please visit my YouTube channels, and there are over 45 to 55 videos on there. Again, all the chapters I'm reading are being posted up there by my team, and share them. Share them so people can listen and get help. Anyway, so this is titled The Innocent, Chapter 3. This gets a little bit, there's some embarrassing moments in here, but this starts getting into the anxiety portion of my life as a young boy, and I'll talk about a little more about it at the end. But this is Chapter 3, The Innocent. When one has the feeling of dislike for evil, when one feels tranquil, one finds pleasure in listening to good teachings. When one has these feelings and appreciates them, one is free of fear. Buddha. To fully understand someone, it's always good to learn about where they came from and what they're all about, what makes them tick. For me to understand where these panic and anxiety attacks originated and how I was able to overcome them, I think it would be helpful to hear a little bit about my childhood. And that's not because something horrific, traumatizing, or extraordinary happened. It's because, for the most part, it didn't. I was born in Cranford, New Jersey in 1961, and our family lived in Dunellen, a suburb of Plainfield, in the central part of the state. Dunellen was typically a small city. Barely a square mile was a typical small city, barely a square mile wide, with plenty of parks and easy access to the highway, and very near the metropolis of New York City. My dad was a blue-collar, hard-working guy who fit right in with the makeup of the neighborhood. In fact, I remember him always working 2 jobs as long as we lived there. My mother also worked a part-time job to help make ends meet, but she was far more interested in raising her kids. Both my parents grew up in Brooklyn in the 1950s and embraced the traditional, classic American values of that era, and were eager to use them to raise their own family. When I turned 5, I was sent to a kindergarten at St. Mary's, the local Catholic school, where I would stay enrolled until 1969. During that time, even as a young boy, I could feel the racial tension of the day as I walked through the hallways. I remember feeling the stress and anxiety it brought, even though I didn't understand it. Even at this age, I remember being in tune to anxiety and insecurity. I felt anxiety all the time. How could I possibly know this was so unusual? I remember one embarrassing incident quite clearly. I was only in 2nd grade, and we had been assigned a very difficult project that involved cutting a picture from one page and pasting it in the right place on the other. And of course, I had somehow completely misunderstood the assignment and instead colored in the area that was supposed to be glued. In Catholic school, they would call out each of us by name and have us come up to the nun at the front of the class to have the work examined and checked off. Although I was a very likable kid and had many friends in the class, I obviously hated to stand up in front of all my schoolmates. I could not bear that kind of attention. When I realized the mistake in my assignment, I panicked. I didn't have any glue, so I scribbled my yellow crayon and as hard and frantically as I could until the waxy buildup was thick and sticky. And then I pressed the picture into the right place, hoping it would stick long enough to have the project approved and let me return to my desk unnoticed. I prayed that this last-minute fix would get me through. Even at just 7 years old, I can remember all the classic symptoms and stages of anxiety and panic attacks coming on. Sweating, heart palpitations, shaking, but back then, to me, this was normal. As bad luck would have it, I was the last student in my row to be called. All I needed was for Sister Mary to look at it for 5 seconds, and I'd get my check mark. I could feel my throat closing as I presented my work to the nun. But the waxy yellow crayon just wouldn't hold like glue, and my hastily attached little picture slipped off and fell helplessly to her desk. The nun scowled, pointed her crooked finger, and ordered me to stand in shame at the front of the class. I was so terrified that I lost control of myself and I shit my pants. I stood there in absolute terror and shame as the nun checked off the remainder of my classmates' work. Then she turned her attention back to me, slashed a ruler across the back of my hand, and ordered me to take my seat. I returned to my seat as instructed, in a swirl of pain and embarrassment. My eyes welled with tears, and I was starting to really stink. As the nun was preparing for the next lesson, she spun her head, crumpled up the bridge of her nose, and asked, "Did somebody crap their pants?" And of course, every finger in the room pointed to me. As I reflect back, I know two things for sure. First, there's no doubt the incident helped enhance my social anxiety. And second, though I liked school, it was the first step in a future of really, really hating schoolwork. I have always been a pleaser. I remember at a very early age wanting to please both my mother and my father, and I always looked for reassurance, and I enjoyed feeling that I had made them proud. Whether it was fixing a mailbox, shoveling snow, or just cleaning up after a birthday party, I thrived on their approval. There was nothing in this world more important to me. But with my classmates, the only way I could get their approval, or so I thought, was to make them laugh. So as odd as it was for a kid that hated to be the center of attention, I would often talk out of turn. At St. Mary's, we had to go to church every day, and if you got caught talking, a 250-pound nun would make a fist and plant it in your back so hard the whole church would vibrate. I was on the receiving end of that punishment more than once. In the summer of 1969, my father came home one afternoon and announced that he had been offered a new job at a medical plastics company called Becton Dickinson in Canaan, Connecticut. Because of the rising racial tensions and crime in the city at the time, I learned he had been looking to relocate our family for quite a long while. And what a wonderful culture shock it would be for an 8-year-old boy. Suddenly, we were living in a wonderful ranch house with 3 acres of land. For a little city boy like me, moving to Canaan was absolute heaven. The school was big, yards were big, and there was freedom. There were even 10,000 acres of land behind my new house called Canaan Mountain, and I would come to explore every inch of it. I believe that our time spent living in Canaan to be the best time of my life. I was able to make many new friends, play outside until after dark every night, and with the help of all the older kids in our neighborhood, I learned how to make go-karts out of wagons, ride mini bikes, play baseball, play pond hockey, and overall, just have a hell of a great time running around the woods. I also learned a lot about myself. I learned I love to be alone. One of my favorite pastimes was to build a fort out of the woods and just sit inside it for hours. Here I was safe, secure, and relaxed. Inside my fort, everything was great and all was always well in this world. But despite my love for our new home, the great friends I was making, and the safe heaven I was building around me, the anxiety and uneasiness was growing and becoming more of a constant struggle. And Sundays were always the worst. On Sunday nights, my parents would often go out on errands and to the movies together and leave me alone with my older sister Laura and my younger brother Stephen. I remember being relaxed and watching that classic 70s TV lineup, The Lawrence Welk Show, Wild Kingdom, and The Wonderful World of Disney, and suddenly feel my throat start to close. I could feel the panic rise the moment they said they were heading out the door. Even my forts couldn't help me ease the anxiety. Because with my parents away, my home base had vanished. In my mind, I would be silently praying for them to stay. And I remember being very upset. They had no way to know the severity of the attacks I was dealing with, and how every time they left, the anxiety deepened. Though I wanted them to stay, I didn't want them to know why, and I'm not sure I could have explained it anyway. Anxiety and panic feeds on itself in a vicious cycle, and when you are a child, you don't possess any of the tools you need to deal with and handle these situations. It was on these Sunday nights that I first started to believe there was something terribly wrong with me, all the time. Why did I do this to my parents? I was a pleaser. I couldn't bear to upset them. I did not understand. The guilt and embarrassment was starting to build. Towns like Canaan tend to be very safe places. There is no strangers, and everybody knows everybody else. Yet still I felt constantly uneasy. I loved being a Boy Scout, but I absolutely hated Boy Scout camp. I enjoyed all the activities during the day, but at night I was terrified that something terrible was going to happen to me. The anxiety I felt was overwhelming, yet I did not dare show it. I remember many instances of creating excuses about things I had to go and do whenever I heard there would be a sleepover coming up. Tommy was one of my best friends, and he and his family lived in a huge 20-acre lot that had a camper on site. I loved hanging around with Tommy, but I hated sleeping over in his camper, and I couldn't bear to say anything to him or anybody about it. Again, I wasn't afraid of the walls closing in or werewolves or maniacs coming out of the forest to attack us. I was simply afraid of my own thoughts. This was the period of my life when the what-ifs began. What if my throat closes? What if I can't breathe? What if I pass out? What if? Embarrassment had taken control of my life. Looking back on it now, although I had so many great childhood memories, I regret not having more. Now, decades later, it's still easier to remember the fear. And there's a couple of pictures of that I'll show you. There's me painting a garage. My father had me paint these nails over, so when they rusted, it didn't show through the paint. That's me fishing in Twin Lakes in Canaan, Connecticut. Canaan, Connecticut was a great time. It was, just as I said in that chapter, it was, as a boy, it's like Mark Twain. There's so much going on. You could do anything. I'd leave in the morning, come back at night. But this, out of all the chapters, and when I do my talks, like with Bradley Hospital and their parents, I'm 8 years old, and I have these thoughts. And I don't mean to bounce around, but I have to go to my anxiety tree. My anxiety tree, which I'll find for you now right here in my book. I talk about it later on in the chapters, but it's important. Here it is right here. It's important for you to know, if you know see the roots and the branches. And the roots, terror, panic, depression, fear, I fail, petrified, I'm not worthy, so on and so forth. All my talks I talk about this anxiety tree. And when you suffer from anxiety, as I did as a very young boy, you don't know what it is. And you don't know how to talk yourself out of it. You don't know how to talk to yourself. And more importantly, a lot of times kids are afraid to tell you their parents. And because they're embarrassed. And they feel that they're not normal, and I don't want to burden my parents with this problem, and so on and so forth. And then guilt sets in, and there's a whole chapter on guilt coming up. But this chapter here is a very, very important chapter to springboard into the education part of my talks on anxiety and panic. For parents to look for certain things in their children, to listen to certain things that they say. Maybe they don't want to go to certain areas, but facing your fears, face your fear and do it anyway kind of thing. Just go through it and you'll be able to deal with it. Yeah, that sounds good, but let me tell you something. From a guy who suffered, if you face your fears the right way, trust me when I tell you, it just eliminates so much in your life. You're always going to have things you fear. But when you fear your imagination, that's worse. And that's the whole problem here, is you start to think of things that might happen to you, which never did. But obviously, anxiety and panic attacks come from imaginary fear. It starts in your head, and that affects your body. And as a young boy, okay, I did not know what was going on. I honestly thought I had diseases. And if you listen to my talks, and you listen to me talking about my book, and you listen to if you go on YouTube and you listen to some of the little snippets about the anxiety and what causes it and what happens in your body, this was the start of it. Every kid gets embarrassed. Okay, great, I shit my pants, I talk about that. And that obviously it happened, and it was an embarrassing moment in my life. But all the other stuff was imaginary. And panic and anxiety, it's an imaginary fear that as a boy it just grows tentacles, and the what ifs start. And those two words, what ifs, are very, very important. And I'm 55 years old now, and I remember this like it was yesterday. I remember sleeping in his name was Tommy Manassi, and I remember sleeping in the back of his camper, staring outside, couldn't breathe, hyperventilating, waiting for something to happen to me. Next morning, acting like nothing happens. And how do you tell your parents that? So I'm going to end it on a good note and just say I'm better now. I'm sitting in my boat now. My fort now is my boat. So I have a lot of forts all over the place. And although I have a lot of friends, a lot of acquaintances, I love doing things, I still, to this day, love being by myself. And it's not because I'm a loner or anything like that. Maybe it is, I don't know. But I just, you know what I think happens is, for years, being by myself caused me anguish, caused me pain, and I always tested myself, and I was like, I can handle this. I can be by myself. I don't care about my thoughts. I don't care. And now that I've healed myself, I think that I enjoy being by myself because I've never been free. My thoughts. I go on I was out in the ocean today. It was 180 feet of water, 5 miles off of Beavertail. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. And it's freedom from fear, freedom from bad thoughts. And it all started when I was a young kid of 8 years old. So take what you will out of this chapter, and please share my videos, subscribe, go to my website, do what you got to do to get this word out. Scared to death to it anyway, so that people will honestly go to it, okay? And they will follow along, and hopefully by the time we get to my toolbox, they will trust, understand, and let's kick the proverbial crap out of it. All right? Have a great day. Take care.